Hello Flight Simmers and welcome back to Alpha Hotel Flight Simulator Training. In this video we'll take a look at instrument failures and system failures that can happen in the Cessna 172 Classic analog or steam gauge panel and how to safely deal with them. We'll also take a look at how we can simulate some of these failures in Microsoft Flight Simulator and practice flying in these conditions. We'll do a separate video on the systems failures that can occur in the Garmin G1000 equipped Cessna 172. As always, if you've enjoyed the content, don't forget to like the video, share with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell to be alerted to new content. Before watching this video, it's a good idea to be familiar with the basics of instrument flight, as well as the basics of instrument departures and the basics of flying instrument approaches. We'll be flying an LPV type RNAV GPS approach at the conclusion of this lesson. So if you want to try to fly that approach with some of your instruments not working, make sure you're proficient at it with all of your instruments functioning. We'll also be using the Garmin GNS 530 and 430 that are installed in the 172 Classic. So make sure you're familiar with those units if you're not already. I'll leave links to the videos on all of those topics in this video's description. Normally, instrument failures and flying approaches with instrument malfunctions is one of the last areas covered during instrument training. So I'd encourage you to check out the entire instrument training playlist and make sure you're familiar with and proficient at all the types of operations you'll want to use in your IFR flying and flight sim, particularly departures, arrivals, and the types of instrument approaches you'd like to fly in Flight Simulator before trying to tackle operating with some of your instruments inoperative. I'll also mention that we'll be using the Cessna 172 Classic for this lesson, which is only available in the deluxe edition of the sim. And we'll also be using a free third-party add-on to create instrument and system failures, but unfortunately that utility will only work on PC. So you won't be able to emulate most of these instrument failures on Xbox, and you won't be able to fly this lesson if you don't have the deluxe edition of the sim. One of the areas of operations required to be tested on a real-world instrument check ride is flying an approach with a loss of primary instrument indicators. So on a real-world check ride, one of the approaches you'll have to fly during the test will be a non-precision approach with some of your instruments not working. So let's take a look at what can fail in the Cessna 172 Classic analog or steam gauge panel and how we safely deal with those failures. The types of instrument failures you can experience with the analog 172 panel include single instrument failures, pitot tube blockage, static port blockage, total pitot-static system failure, and vacuum system failure. First, let's look at single instrument failures. These are pretty straightforward to deal with and are usually caused by something inside the instrument breaking, loss of power to the instrument if it's electrically powered, or loss of input from an aircraft system. When this happens, you'll have to compensate using your other instruments, but each instrument failure is unique. If you lose your airspeed indicator, it's likely due to a pitot tube blockage. This can happen if you climb through icing conditions and forget to turn your pitot heat on, so the first potential remedy is to turn that on. But it can also happen if debris gets into the tube somehow and clogs it up, like, for example, a wasp crawling into it and getting stuck. Not that that's ever happened to me. If this happens, the drain hole on the back of the pitot tube is usually clear and the airspeed indicator will slowly decrease to 0. You can also get in situations where both the ram air intake and the drain hole are blocked. In these cases, the pressure will be trapped inside the pitot tube and usually cause it to be stuck at its last indication, though if you climb or descend, it will act like an altimeter since it's still hooked up to the static system, increasing if you climb and decreasing if you descend, though this situation is pretty rare and I don't think there's any way to replicate it in Flight Simulator. In either case, you'll want to use attitude, power, and configuration settings that you know will get you your desired speed. For example, at cruise, you know that a level pitch and bank attitude and about 2400 to 25 100 RPMs with a flaps up configuration will get you level flight at 105 knots or so in the Cessna 172. So just use these settings to get yourself in the ballpark of the speed you need until you get yourself back on the ground. You can also use secondary indications of speed, like the ground speed readout on your GPS or the amount of noise created by the relative wind, to confirm that you're at about the speed that you want to be. An attitude indicator failure is considered the granddaddy of instrument failures because you lose the instrument that gives you the most information about your aircraft situation. Fortunately, it has a big red flag that pops up when it fails. You'll notice when it goes, it dies very slowly. Some like to say attitude indicators die like the heroes in old Western movies, taking a minute or so to finally reach the ground and expire. When it finally dies, the attitude indicator itself slumps to about a 20 degrees nose up attitude and a 30-degree left bank attitude, at least in flight sim. Many real-world pilots recommend carrying something with you to cover up failed instruments, since looking at erroneous information, particularly erroneous attitude information, can cause you to react in surprise to it, which is the last thing you want to do when you're dealing with an instrument failure. Better to have no data than bad data. Unfortunately, there's no way I know of to cover the instruments in Flight Simulator short of putting a post-it note on your monitor. With the attitude indicator gone, you only have your turn coordinator left to give you bank information and your altimeter and VSI to give you pitch information. So you need to rely on these instruments to make small changes in pitch, bank, and attitude to get yourself back down on the ground. And keeping attitude and power changes relatively small, slow, and smooth will aid you in maintaining aircraft control. An altimeter failure usually results in the altimeter becoming stuck, not moving when you're obviously climbing or descending, or just indicating erroneously. The vast majority of altimeter failures are caused by static port blockage, which will also affect your VSI, and there is an alternate static source inside the cabin that we'll talk about in a bit. If you lose your altimeter and the alternate static source is not solving the problem, you need to see if there's a secondary way to get altitude information. In the 172 analog panel, there's a flight level indicator on your transponder that you can use to see roughly what altitude you're at. In real life, you can also ask ATC what your altitude is, indicating from your transponder, since it has its own altimeter, and then get their assistance in maintaining the proper altitude. You can also use your VSI and timing to get to an altitude that you'd like to use, and then confirm with ATC or your mode seed readout that you've gotten to the correct altitude. Otherwise, just use proper attitude, power, and configuration settings, and consider using an approach with vertical guidance if needed to get back on the ground. Losing your VSI is not as big of a deal as losing some of your other instruments. Just like with your altimeter, a failure usually results in the VSI needle becoming stuck, and just like the altimeter, it's usually the result of a static port blockage, which is easily fixed. If you're unable to fix it by switching to the alternate static source, you can just monitor your altimeter to guesstimate what your rate of descent is while using the proper attitude, power, and configuration settings for your phase of flight. A heading indicator failure results in the heading indicator becoming stuck, indicating erroneously or not agreeing with the magnetic compass, or spinning rapidly. If you lose your heading indicator, you'll have to use your magnetic compass as your source of heading information. And we'll talk more about doing compass turns and time turns here in a little bit. You can also use your aircraft track information from your GPS, if you're so equipped, to get a good idea of which way your aircraft is headed. Losing the turn coordinator is probably the least risk instrument failure in instrument flying. Failure can be caused by instrument damage and loss of electrical power to the instrument, since its gyro is spun with an electric motor. There's an orange flag that comes up on the right side of the instrument when the instrument dies, and the bank indicator will stop moving. The ball should still work, since it's just a ball floating in fluid, unless someone's completely smashed the gauge. All you have to do with this failure is use the correct bank angle on your attitude indicator to get a standard rate of turn. And if you've forgotten how to do that, you want to take your true airspeed, divide it by 10, and then add half of that figure to itself. For example, if we're doing a true airspeed of 100 knots, 100 divided by 10 is 10. Half of 10 is 5. Add those two answers together. 10 plus 5 is 15. We need 15 degrees of bank to get a standard rate turn. Okay, so now let's look at system failures. The simplest system failure is the pitot system failure because it has the same causes, symptoms, and corrective action as an airspeed indicator failure. So it's typically going to be caused by the pitot tube being blocked with either ice or debris. You're going to have a loss of airspeed indication that will just go down to 0 and stay there. Or if both the ram air inlet and the drain hole are blocked, you'll get a stuck airspeed needle, and then it will act like an altimeter going up as you climb and going down as you descend. Corrective action, turn on the pitot heat and see if you can get the ice melted off. If there is ice on there that's blocking the ram air intake. And then if that doesn't fix anything, then use your known attitude, power, and configuration settings for the appropriate phases of flight, and then try to use secondary speed indications such as your GPS ground speed and listening to the relative wind noise level outside the aircraft. A static system failure or a static port blockage will typically cause both your altimeter and your VSI to freeze and not indicate accurately anymore, and it can also cause your airspeed to indicate slightly inaccurately if you are at a different altitude than where it failed, but this is usually not that much of a difference from a normal airspeed indication. This is typically caused by the static port icing over or getting blocked with debris, or getting water in it from an aircraft washing, or by getting tape placed over the ports, ironically, when they are trying to prevent water from getting into the static ports during a washing, and then subsequently not being removed after the wash is done. A thorough pre-flight can obviously prevent this. Fortunately, there is a backup or alternate static port on most non-pressurized aircraft that's located inside the cabin. In the 172, to switch over to this alternate system or this alternate port, you use the red knob that's located in between and below the throttle and the mixture controls. If you suspect that your static port is blocked, just pull this knob and it should solve the problem 99% of the time. Just be aware that the pressure in the cabin is typically just a little bit lower than it is outside the aircraft due to the aircraft's the propeller slipstream. So you might see the altimeter and the VSI indicate a very slight climb. When you pull the knob, it'll just jump up for a second or so, and then the altimeter may read slightly higher when using this alternate system. Because of this, it's not a bad idea to add 50 feet or so to the minimums of any approach that you might use to get back on the ground. If utilizing the alternate static source doesn't solve the issues, then you want to try to treat it as a simultaneous altimeter and VSI failure. You want to use your second sources of altitude, such as the altimeter or the altimeter readout on your transponder if it's available, and utilizing the proper attitude, power, and configuration settings for the appropriate phase of flight or for descent or climb. You can have a simultaneous failure of the pitot static system, the entire system. Really, the only condition I can think of that would cause this would be severe icing, because you'd really need your pitot tube to be blocked and your static port to be blocked at the same time. And this is going to cause a loss of airspeed indicator, loss of altimeter, and loss of VSI. Your corrective actions would be to use your alternate static source and see if that at least gets you back your altimeter and your VSI. Use your pitot heat and see if that will melt off the ice if there's ice on your pitot tube, and get your airspeed back. And then you still have the ability to use your pitch and, or excuse me, your attitude, configuration, and power settings to fly the airplane. and you can use secondary indications of altitude and airspeed, such as your GPS ground speed and transponder mode C readout as well. This would be a pretty rare situation. Again, the only time I could think that this would happen would be probably severe icing conditions, but it is technically possible, so I thought I would throw it in there. Finally, the most complicated failure you can have, and spoiler alert, the one you're most likely to get on a check ride is a vacuum system failure. The vacuum system on the 172 is what provides the air to spin the gyroscopes inside the attitude indicator and heading indicator. So if it fails, you lose those two instruments. If your vacuum pump or system fails on the analog 172, you'll get a left and right VAC annunciation at the top of the panel, and then your gyro flag will pop up on your attitude indicator, and then the pressure on the vacuum gauge will drop to the bottom of the gauge. Normally, when you have your engine running at cruise power, it's going to be in the green and it will drop to the bottom. You'll then see your attitude indicator and your heading indicator fail. The attitude indicator will slowly slump to that nose high, wing down indication over about 30 seconds to a minute. And then the heading indicator will become sluggish before finally freezing on its last heading. Corrective action for this condition includes covering the attitude indicator in real life, at least the attitude indicator. You could also cover the heading indicator, and then using your airspeed indicator, altimeter, and VSI as your reference for pitch, and your turn coordinator as your reference. Your turn coordinator as your reference for bank, and your compass, your magnetic compass, as your indicator for heading. This is also sometimes referred to as partial panel flying. Using relatively smooth, slow changes in bank, pitch, and power and configuration, again, will generally make the aircraft easier to control. Using the compass as your primary source of heading information provides some challenges, though, since the compass has several errors associated with it. Since the compass is basically a magnet floating in fluid that always points to the north, it only reads accurately when you are in straight and level flight. When you bank, particularly from a north or south heading, the magnet tips or dips as it tries to stay pointed north and reads inaccurately. You'll notice when you enter a turn from a south heading, the compass will initially race ahead of the heading you're on, but then the error will lessen until it reads accurately on an east or west heading. If you enter a turn to the north, the compass will initially indicate a turn in the wrong direction, and then lag the heading that you're actually on, again with the error lessening until you get on an east or west heading. Again, the compass will indicate accurately when you're on an east or west heading, even if you're banked, as long as you're not accelerating or decelerating. If you accelerate, it will indicate a turn to the north, even if you're not turning, and if you decelerate, it will indicate a turn to the south. This error and the turning error are referred to as magnetic dip. With the acceleration error, you just need to be aware of it and cognizant of it when you're accelerating or decelerating. A good way to remember it is the acronym ANDS, A-N-D-S. Accelerate north and decelerate south. There are two ways to compensate for magnetic dip turning errors. The first one is called compass turns. With a compass turn, you turn until the compass indicates the heading that you want plus or minus the error, so that when you roll wings level, you'll be on the correct heading. How much error correction you need to put in depends on the heading that you want. Again, on an east or west heading, there is no magnetic dip turning error. So other than leading your rollout by about 10 degrees or so, you can roll out right on the indicating heading. When the lubber line is getting close to east or west, you can go ahead and roll out, and you should be on east or west. When you are 30 degrees north or south of an east or west heading, or 60 degrees north or south of a north or south heading, then you need about 10 degrees. So you need to overshoot or undershoot the heading by about 10 degrees. And we'll talk about which you need to do depending on if you're going to a northerly or southerly heading. If you're about 30 degrees away from north or south, then you will need about 20 degrees of correction. And if you're going to try to roll out on north or south itself, then you need about 30 degrees of correction. When turning to a southerly heading, you need to fly past the heading that you actually want. With a northerly heading, you need to roll out short of the heading that you actually want. Two ways to remember this are south leads and north lags, though this one never really was very helpful for me. I prefer UNOS, UNOS, undershoot north and overshoot south. Let's take a look at some examples of how this will work in practical usage. So let's say I'm on a heading of 090. I want to turn left to a heading of 360. I know I need to undershoot north, and I know the correction is 30 degrees. So on my compass, I want to roll until I roll 30 degrees short of north. That will be a heading of 030, or an indication on the magnetic compass of 030. So if I get to 030 on the magnetic compass, I should be able to roll out, and once I roll wings level, I should see an indication of north. I should see 360 or N on the compass. If I'm going the opposite direction, if I'm going towards the south, I know I need to overshoot south. I need to go to the indicated heading that I want, but go past that heading to actually be on the heading that I want to be on. And so if I'm going to a heading of south, I need to overshoot it, and I know the correction is 30 degrees. So I need to roll past south. I need to see the S roll past me on the magnetic compass all the way over to 30 degrees beyond that, so over to 210. So once I get the 210 indication on the lubber line of the compass, I should be able to roll wings level, and I should see, once I get wings level, a south indication or 180 degrees on the magnetic compass. All right, so let's take a look at a practical demonstration of what that looks like in Flight Simulator. So you can see currently I am on a heading of east on the compass. Let's say that I want to turn to north. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to roll into a standard rate turn. And again, I want to undershoot north. So I want to go till the compass says 030. It's going to lag. I'm doing a little more than standard rate here, so I will correct for that. I'm pitching up a little bit too. But I want to roll until I see the compass indicate 030. And there is 030 right there. So I'll go ahead and roll out. And you can see as I roll out, the compass corrects for its dip there, and it indicates a heading of north. So that is the undershoot error. Now notice when we make a turn back to the south that the compass initially indicates a turn in the wrong direction. It shows that we're going towards the west when we're actually going towards the east, but then it catches up and it eventually indicates correctly when we get around over to east. So once we get to east, I can roll out right on east or lead the turn just a little bit, and there's no error there. So that is correct. I don't need to overshoot or undershoot there. And then I can use time turns, real small turns, to make a correction from there. Now notice when I make a turn to the south, again, try to use that standard rate turn. Not doing very good on holding my altitude right now. Notice that it's going to race ahead, and then I actually want to overshoot south. I want to roll past south. So there comes south coming through the lubber line on the compass right now. I'm actually going to let it go all the way to 210. And here comes 210 right there. So I'll roll out. Notice it rolls back to a heading of about south. And then I can, again, make a small correction. I can use like a little time turn. I'm about 10 degrees off, so I could roll into a left standard rate turn and go 1, 2, 3, roll back out. And I'm a little closer to south. I can just make maybe a little half standard rate turn for a couple seconds and get myself back onto south. But that is how the compass turns work, the overshoot north and the undershoot south, and how you can get yourself in the ballpark of the right heading, and then you can use timed turns to get yourself back on the correct heading. Another way to make turns using the compass is using timed turns. If you look at the turn coordinator, you'll see it says 2 minutes underneath the ball. This means that if you bank at the angle indicated on the instrument, you'll make a standard rate turn, which is completing a 360-degree turn in 2 minutes, or 120 seconds. This means it will take 60 seconds, or 1 minute, to make a 180-degree turn, and 30 seconds to make a 90-degree turn. If you do the math, this works out to be about 3 degrees per second, which means a 10-degree turn will take about 3 seconds, just a smidge over that, and a 30-degree turn will take about 10 seconds. You can combine compass turns and time turns as well. I prefer to use compass turns for large heading changes, and then timed turns to fine-tune my heading if it's off once I roll out. Also remember that when using the compass as your source of direction information, when you look at the instrument, think of it as looking into a mirror. You need to turn in the opposite direction from the direction where you see your heading depicted. For example, right now, if I look at the compass, I'm on a heading of 360. If I want to go to a heading of 330, I see it off to the right. But if we look at our heading indicator here operating normally, that's actually off to the left. So I actually need to turn left instead of turning right, even though the depiction is indicating that it's off to the right. Remember that the compass is backwards. It's like looking into a mirror. I also use the saying right for height and left is less to remember which way I need to turn. If I'm going to a smaller numbered heading, I generally need to turn left, and if I want the numbers to go up, I need to go right. Just remember that the numbers start over again when you reach 0 or 360. Also remember that, particularly in real life, you can use any other data that's available to you. So something like using your GPS ground track is a good idea if your aircraft is so equipped. It's also good to remember that if one or more of your instruments fail, your autopilot may not work correctly or may not work at all. So if you see that you're having an instrument failure, it's probably best to go ahead and kick the autopilot off and fly the aircraft manually until you've assessed the situation and determined its impact on your automation systems. Before we go demonstrate flying and flying an approach with an instrument failure, I'll also mention that in real-world training and checking, instrument failures in aircraft are typically just simulated by the instructor or examiner covering up the gauge or gauges that they don't want available to you. They might ask some questions as they do so, such as, okay, your attitude indicator and your heading indicator appear to be failing. What do you think just happened? What else do you expect to see? And how are you going to deal with this situation? So to demonstrate this failure, what we're going to do is plan a flight from Pine Bluff off to the the east northeast. I've got Muscle Shoals in there as the airport we're going to, and I'm just going to put a direct route in there. Identifier for Muscle Shoals is Kilo Mike Sierra Lima, and so we will take off from probably 18 in Pine Bluff, and we'll take off to the south and then turn to intercept the course. We'll climb up to a cruise altitude of 3,000 feet, and then I'll use the RAND failures third-party app to produce a vacuum failure. So we'll see what a vacuum failure looks like. We'll see what it looks like when the attitude indicator dies, and then we'll be around this area right here probably when it dies. So we'll assume that we declare an emergency with air traffic control, and we realize that we can turn and just make a single left-hand turn to go direct to Hogum intersection on the RNAV GPS to runway 36 in Stuttgart. And so we'll use that to do our no gyro approach or our partial panel approach. So jumping into the world map for the setup here, to set up for this flight, we're going to choose the Textron Aviation Cessna 172 Skyhawk. It will be just the 172 Skyhawk, not the G1000 edition. I will go ahead and go to weight and balance. I'll keep the two 170-pound occupants in the front seats, and I will ratchet the fuel up to 2 full tanks. Failures, you don't need to do anything with that. We can't fail the vacuum system in flight attendants or in, flight simulators menu. We'll have to do it with a third-party app and customization. You can do whatever you'd like to do with that. We'll go ahead and hop over to the departure field. We'll go ahead and select Pine Bluff. So that's Kilo Papa Bravo Foxtrot. That will be our departure airport, and I'll put that in there. And I'm just going to leave it at runway 18. Let's see here. We'll go ahead and select the date and time. I'm going to have to move this back because it's a little late in this time zone. To get the calendar to work correctly, I'm going to put it in mid-June day for lighting conditions. And then I'll actually do the time down here on the bottom left-hand corner and put that at noon. I'm just going to situate the aircraft on the runway. You can start on the ramp if you'd like to for realism, but I'm not going to even film the takeoff on this one. It'll just be a normal takeoff from runway 8. We'll get to, or runway 18. We'll get up to 400 feet above the field. We'll make our left turn on course, climb up to our cruising altitude of 3,000 feet, and then we'll join the flight from there. And the way I have the weather set up is I have the altitude at AMSL, no precipitation, no snow depth, no lightning, temperature set around 61 degrees, pressure standard at 2992, humidity at 1, which is the lowest level. Putting it higher than that can affect your visibility. And then I have the cloud coverage at 100% overcast, density at 0.5, scatter, it really doesn't matter what you do with that. I have it set to 0. I have the top set up around 11,000 feet, which will keep us in the clouds the whole time, and then the bottom set up around negative 300 feet. And the way I came up with this is I took my LNAV minimums from the RNAV GPS approach there in Stuttgart, and I subtracted 1,000 feet, and that's going to give me about a 500-foot ceiling and 1 mile visibility, which is what we'll say that they're reporting over there in Stuttgart when we have our emergency and make our approach into that field. So we're sitting on the runway 18 in Pine Bluff. I have a very simple flight plan loaded into the GPS, just Pine Bluff direct to Muscle Shoals, Alabama. We'll assume that we've gotten our IFR clearance. We were cleared to 3,000. That is our filed cruising altitude. So we will do a normal takeoff here from runway 18 in Pine Bluff. We'll do a normal takeoff. We'll do a normal standard IFR diverse departure procedure. Then we'll make a turn, intercept the course, and climb up to the cruising altitude. We'll assume we get up to the cruising altitude, we get all cruised out, and that's when bad things start to happen. All right, so I am leveled off at 3,000 feet. I'm about 8.5, 9 miles to the east of Pine Bluff. I'm cruised out at 3,000, and I start to hear a little bit of a knocking or rattling coming from the engine compartment. So I let ATC know, something's not right here. It sounds like I've got some rattling coming from the engine compartment. And I'm not really sure what's going on. Little do I know it's my vacuum pump about to conk itself out. And so we will go into the RAN failures menu, and we will show you how to destroy your vacuum pump. So this is the RAN failures menu here. You've got several menus over on the left-hand side. You've got overview, which is where you can actually instigate the failures. You've got presets, which is where you can set up the failures. The fail list, if you go in here and say show failures, it will show you what is failed at this time. And then the help just has instructions on how to use the program. So I'm going to go to presets and show you how to set things up. You go down here to these main aircraft system tabs here, and what I do is I go through and I uncheck all the boxes that I don't want failures to come in, or where I don't want failures to occur, and then I put zeros over in here just to be sure that none of this stuff will fail. And I go ahead and apply and save all that, and then I go through each of these categories and put everything to 0 except in the panel. And in the panel I go in here. Oops, I'm sorry, I didn't do that. Let's see here, vacuum fail. It might have been in other, actually. There we are. So in other, I put vacuum failure, and I have it enabled, and I put it at 1,000, which is the highest value you can put it at, which means for sure I will have a vacuum failure. And then I save that, and then I go into the settings, and you can fail something so it fails at a certain speed, a certain altitude, a certain time, and you can do a range on those, or you can do instant failure, or you can make the computer program pick out randomly what it wants to do. Basically, makes it random of one of these four things. I want an instant failure. I want it to fail when I want it to fail. So I've just checked the instant failure, and I'll go ahead and save that. Now I'll go to the overview. And I've got this saved as vacuum fail. And what I will do is I will load up this preset from the menu here, and then I will hit start, and that will tell me that the failures are started, and I should see that start to happen in Flight Simulator immediately once I do that. I will say that right now I have been having troubles getting this to replicate airspeed failures and pedostatic failures and other failures, but the vacuum failure is still working fine. I don't know if that has to do with like a recent update. This program itself has not been updated since March of 2023, and it's now September of 2024. So it could be something in a recent sim update is messing with the program. But like I said, it's still working for vacuum failures, and I haven't tried it with engines and things like that yet. So I don't know what is going on there. So I'm back in the simulator now. I have just hit the start button on the failures, and we can say our left vacuum failure has come on. Our pump has dropped to 0, and the gyro flag has come on. That was our directional gyro. So I'm going to turn off my autopilot, because the autopilot is going to attempt to follow the flight director. I'm going to start ignoring my flight director. I'm paying attention mostly to my turn coordinator for bank right now, my altimeter and my VSI for pitch, and then I'm looking more at the GPS than anything else for heading, because that's going to give me some precise heading information, but I'm also looking at the compass as well, so that I could use the magnetic compass only if I needed to. So I am on with Little Rock departure. I'm going to call them up, and I'm going to say Cessna 172 Alpha Hotel. It appears that we have lost our vacuum system. I have lost my attitude indicator. I have lost my heading indicator. I need to declare an emergency, and I need to get on the ground as soon as I can. They say Cessna 172 Golf Hotel, Roger. Stuttgart Airport is off to your left-hand side right now, about 15 miles. Would you like to do the RNAV GPS into Stuttgart? And I say, yes, I would like that. I will need vectors over to the first fix if you could. And I said, give me just a minute right now, because right now I'm just fighting with the airplane and trying to keep it under control. And I will let you know when I'm ready to go to the first fix on the approach. So Little Rock approach calls back, and they say, Roger, you can expect that. You can expect the RNAV GPS 36 into Stuttgart straight in, no procedure turn. Let us know when you're ready to take that first turn. So what I'm going to do now that I have the aircraft steady and stable is I'm going to keep scanning my instruments, but I'm going to go ahead and load up the approach. I'm going to hit procedure. I'm going to go to select approach. I'll hit enter. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear this cursor out by hitting the cursor button. I'm going to use the big knob to roll back up to the airport field, and I'm going to change where I want the procedure. So I'm going to type in KSGT is the identifier for Stuttgart. And I could also do this via the nearest page if I wanted to do that. So I will hit enter. That brings up the list of the approaches for Stuttgart. I will roll down to the RNAV GPS to runway 36. It says, where do you want to start this from? I want to start it from Hogum intersection. So I will do that, and it says load or activate. I want to go there right now. So I will go ahead and activate the approach. That's got the approach in there, and then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to this hold, because I do not want to fly this procedure turn. So I hit the small knob to get the cursor field active. I use the big knob to roll down to the hold, and now I'm going to hit clear to get rid of it. It says, yes, do you want to do that? I'm going to say, yes, I do want to do that. Now we can see it's Hogum, Laos, and Marv, and so we'll dive into the approach plate real quick and do a quick briefing on that. So we'll do a real quick brief on the approach, just to take a look at the high points here. It is in Stuttgart, Arkansas. We have the right city. It's the RNAV GPS to runway 36 at Stuttgart Municipal. That's SGT, which is what we loaded into our FMS. The TNA we're not going to worry about since we are an emergency aircraft. None of those apply to us. It says when local altimeter is not received, use Little Rocks. We have received the local altimeter from Little Rock Approach. It says things about increasing your minimums for the inoperative approach lighting system. When you're using the altimeter at Little Rock, you have to increase your visibility to 1 1/8 mile. That is not a player for us. And then it says VDP is not available when using the Little Rock altimeter settings, all not applicable to us. The MSFS is the type of system they have, so it is an approach lighting system with sequence flashing lights. However, it's not present in Flight Simulator, so that will mean we'll need to bump the minimums up to 1 mile visibility. Missed approach is climb straight ahead to Zedek and enter the hold at Zedek. Hopefully we will not have to do that, as they are currently reporting weather that will allow us to get in. It has the frequencies, and then it has the chart with the water. It has the obstacles, tallest obstacles over here, 1424 on our altimeter. And then we're just going to look at the main approach. It has Hogum intersection, which is both an initial approach fix and an intermediate fix. We will use it as an initial, well, actually an intermediate fix. We will go directly to that fix. We will not perform the procedure turn. They will clear straight in since we are an emergency aircraft, and then we'll head on in from there. Prior to reaching Hogum, we can go down to 2,000 feet. Once established on the course, we're actually going to get a clearance from ATC to 2,000 prior to reaching Hogum. Once we get past Hogum, we can go down to 1,900 feet and intercept the glide path from there. But I'm just going to stay at 2,000 feet since we are no gyro, no attitude indicator, no heading indicator, and intercept the glide path from 2,000. There's no reason to mess around going down to this next 100 feet down when that's just another power change and another configure or another attitude change, so we won't mess with that. Forgot to mention the MSA is 2,500 feet, but again, we're looking at the charts, we could go down to 2,000, and that we'll assume that's what ATC clears us down to once we're on our way to Hogum. Laus is where we intercept the glide path indicated by the lightning bolt there, and it will actually be a little bit before for us since we're a little bit higher. I will actually configure once the glide path starts coming in rather than configuring 3 miles prior to Laus and then reducing the power to track the glide path. That's just one more time that we're not messing around with the power and the attitude. If we just do it all as the glide path is coming in, that gives us probably a little more stable approach on a no gyro approach. Let's see here. None of this stuff applies to us here, right here, this intersection here and the VDP, because we are using the LPV minimums. It does give us the missed approach procedure in graphical format down here. It tells us that the LPV minimums, or the localizer performance with vertical guidance minimums, is a decision altitude of 474. That is 250 feet above the touchdown zone elevation. And then, of course, the parentheses are just for military, and this is for category A through D aircraft, so that is for us. Runway 36, again, we have the approach lights, but they're not working, so we'll bump up the visibility. The runway is 6,015 feet by 100 feet, plenty long for our Cessna 172, and it shows that the approach comes in pretty much straight in, just a little bit angling off from the left, so the runway may be off just a little bit to our right, but we should be good and centered up when we get to the decision altitude. As we declared our emergency and asked for this approach, ATC called back and they said weather at Stuttgart is currently calm winds, 1 statute mile visibility, ceiling 500 overcast, temperature 23 dew point 23, altimeter 2992. So we do have the local Stuttgart weather from Little Rock. They're not going to make us go and dial the AWOS in since we are an emergency aircraft and have our hands full just controlling the aircraft. So that will be what we need to shoot the approach with the minimums that are on the plate, other than bumping up the visibility for those inoperative approach lights. So I tell air traffic control, I said, I'm pretty well stabilized here. I'd like to go ahead and take that turn towards the approach. He says, Roger, turn left heading 010, proceed direct Hogum when able. Pilot's discretion, descend and maintain 2,000 feet. So I'm going to hold on to 3,000 feet for right now. I'm going to enter a standard rate turn. I'm watching my compass and I'm watching my GPS ground track probably more than anything. Flight Simulator does get really squirrely with the pitch when you make the turn, so just be aware of that and be careful not to look up and scare yourself with the altimeter. You don't have an accurate altimeter, so it makes you look up and go, whoa, I'm way nose high, when you're actually not. So I am more or less on course here. Let's see here. I'm probably going to redirect it here in just a second since the course isn't quite lined up. So I'll just go ahead and redirect it direct to Hogum here. Enter, activate, looks good. I want a 008 track. If I can make my desired track and my track line up, then the course should stay in the center. That is the trick to that. All right, so I'm pretty well stabilized at 3,000 feet on the approach course right now. I'm just trying to keep the turn coordinator level, and what I'm going to do to descend now is going to bring it back down to about 2,000 RPMs or so, 1,800 feet or 1,800 RPM, something like that. And I will just let the nose drop and watch my airspeed and just kind of pitch for my airspeed and use power to control my descent, and I'll go on down to 2,000. You can see when I'm looking at the altimeter and I'm looking at the VSI, I get distracted with that and I tend to not focus on my turn coordinator as much. So you do have to be careful about things like that. And this airplane keeps wanting to tilt back to the right, so that's not helping matters any. So I'll go over there to about a 000 heading, see if I can get it back on course here. And we're coming up on Hogum, and so we'll level off there at 2,000 feet, and then we'll probably just intercept the glide path from 2,000 feet. Course is nice and centered up now. I got to keep that altimeter in my scan. Try to get it back over there to a 008 track. There's 2,100 feet, about 2050. I'll bring my throttle back to 2,500 RPMs and let the nose just come up on its own. And then again, I use the altimeter and the VSI as my pitch indication there to see when I need to pitch up or pitch down, and try to keep it. It's almost like the VSI is your attitude indicator for pitch now. Just be careful about overcorrecting. You want to make everything very small, just small pitch movements. And you can see anytime I start focusing on the attitude indicator and the altimeter, I tend to take my focus away from the turn coordinator, and the aircraft tends to bank to the right just a little bit, and that's when I can start to get a little messed up here. So about 5 miles from Hogum, they have told us the weather at Stuttgart is 501, so it looks like we will be able to get in on that LPV approach there. And so we'll just keep tracking this course, and then once the glide path comes in, we'll go ahead and configure. I'm just going to stay at 2,000 feet rather than trying to whittle my way down to 1,900 feet. When I get to Hogum, I can intercept the glide path from there just as easy as I can from Hogum, so that is my plan. I'm going to kick the rudder to the right a little bit, see if it'll stop this left bank here. Going a little low, so I'm going to correct on that. And again, we're just flying that course in, and once we get past Hogum, and it's going to be a left turn to a course of about 360. Yeah, 360 is the inbound course. So we will have to make just a little bit of a left turn once we get to Hogum. All right, so there is Hogum. I'll go ahead and make a left bank to get on that. Looks like a 002 desired track up on the top left-hand corner of the GPS. That is what will keep my needle centered. And again, the glide path is going to start coming down here. We're 5.5 miles from Laos, which is where we will intercept the glide path. So I will try to keep on that 002 track. And notice I'm just banking just right underneath. I'm just tucking the wing underneath that bank angle mark, or that wings level mark, to make a very small turn. And then I'm keeping my eye on my compass, but I'm really focusing on this track up here because that will keep me centered up with the course. If I make the desired track, the DTK, and the TRK match up, that needle should not move. All right, so the glide path is coming in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my power back to about 1800 RPM. I'm going to try to hang on to the altitude. I'm going to go ahead and put that first notch of flaps out. I get to 85. I'm going to go ahead and put the second notch of flaps out, trying to keep that altitude until the glide path comes in. And then I'll put in that third and final notch of flaps. I got to keep a close eye on my track there, and there is the glide path starting to come in. There's 70 knots, so I'll go ahead and bring the power back up to about 2200 RPMs. And I need to get a little bit to the left here. I'm getting off course, and I want about a 300 to 400 foot per minute descent on this approach. It's 70 knots, about 2100 RPMs. Should be good. Still a little bit to the left, so I need to lean a little bit left here. Go into maybe a 5-degree correction. I'm getting a little high, so I want about a 500 foot per minute descent right now. And then I want to get on a 400 foot per minute descent once I get on that glide path. There's that glide path, so I'm using very small changes in pitch here. I'm on the course now, so I'm going to lean back over to the right and get 002 in there. That should hold it steady. Try to keep on that 300 to 400 foot per minute descent. Should keep me on that glide path. I'm about 1,000 feet from the ceiling right now. There's 003. That should hold it in there pretty well. I'm just a little bit high on the glide path. I'm just using little leans here on the turn coordinator and very small changes in pitch and power. About 5 knots fast, so I probably need to bring that power back just a little bit more. Got that GPS course good and centered up there. Just a little bit high on the glide path still, so I need to bring that power back a little bit more. Try for 2,000. Going left there on my track, so I need to keep that track in my scan. Notice when you get slower, your corrections tend to have bigger an effect. I'm going to pitch up just a little bit. Really sensitive on that altimeter, or on that VSI. Kind of watch your altimeter more than your VSI. I'm starting to get slow, or not slow. I'm starting to get just a little bit low, but I'm also just a little bit fast. Not as pretty as an ILS, but this is an emergency situation. As long as I don't go to 3/4 scale deflection, I should be okay. I'm leaning too much to the right. Actually, I need to come a little bit right now. Oh, going low on the glide slope, so I'm going to add some power in. I'm going to put a little trim in there as well. Keep it holding on that 300 to 400 foot per minute down. That's where I want to be. I'll take a look up here at about 700 feet. About 620 is where that ceiling should be. And we'll take a look up. And there's our airport. So that is how you fly a partial panel approach, non-precision approach, in the Cessna 172 Classic with a vacuum system failure. As far as the standards go, they're listed in Area of Operations 6, Emergency Operations. It just says that you should be able to recognize if primary flight instruments are inaccurate or inoperative, and then advise ATC or the evaluator. Again, usually in real life, that's not a big problem because they're covering up your gauges. So you just tell them, well, you're covering up the attitude indicator and the heading indicator. I guess that means my vacuum system has failed. And they might ask you, well, what else would you see? And want you to recognize that you have the enunciation and the vacuum pump failure. Then it says you have to complete a non-precision instrument approach without the use of primary flight instruments. And then the standards for the approach itself are in Area Operations 6 Task A, which is your non-instrument or your non-precision approaches. The standards are pretty much the same as they are when you fly them with all instruments. You should maintain your altitude plus or minus 100 feet, your selected heading plus or minus 10 degrees, your airspeed plus or minus 10 knots, and accurately track radials, courses, and bearings prior to reaching the final approach segment. And then once you hit the final approach segment, you should have no more than a 3/4 scale deflection of the CDI or the vertical course deviation indicator as well. Maintain your airspeed plus or minus 10 knots, and if applicable, MDA plus or minus 100 feet. We have a decision altitude since this is a LPV approach, so that is not applicable to us. And then we will fly that down to the missed approach altitude. And obviously, going missed approach would not be a great idea off of this, but so that's why you want to get good weather reports before you start the approach. But the standards are pretty much the same for flying the approach without your primary instruments as they are with flying them with your primary instruments. That concludes this video. Hopefully it's giving you the knowledge and skills you need to set up and practice instrument approaches with instrument and system failures on your own. Again, if you've enjoyed the content, don't forget to like the video, share with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell to be alerted to new content. Make sure to check out the rest of the channel for videos on basic and advanced flying, IFR flying, aircraft and avionics checkouts, and more. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.